Welcome. I'm just going to let some folks trickle in from the waiting room here. All right, looks like we've got everybody in from the waiting room, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to the ARI Tuesday Night Education Series. This is our last webinar of the season, so really excited you could join us for this. My name's Emma Walker, and I'm ARI's Education Director. And I'm really excited to welcome the crew from onX tonight to talk to us a little bit about the Avalanche Terrain Exposure Scale. Andy Sovic is leading the charge on the ATES layer over at onX, and I'm really excited to have him here. Andy and I have had the opportunity to work together quite a bit over the last few years, including also for Andy's company, Beacon Guidebooks. So Andy also has a series of guidebooks about ski tours that you can do all over the country. There's a bunch of different areas that you can check out. And I'll actually probably put a link in the chat closer to the end of the session so folks can check those out if you're interested. But really excited to have Andy here. He has a wealth of knowledge about this topic, and he's going to tell us all about the ATES layer, what it is, and how we can use it. So without further ado, I'll stop sharing my screen. I'm going to go ahead and turn off my camera and mute, but I'll be here to answer questions if they come up. Folks, I'm about to open up the chat so everybody can ask questions. If you have them, feel free to drop them into the chat or into the Q&A. We also have Tony from onX on hand to answer specific product questions. So if you have questions about onX, Tony can answer those as we're going. If you have questions about ATES or about Avalanche education, Andy and I can answer those towards the end of the session. So drop them in as you come up with them, and we'll find a way to get them answered. All right, Andy, I'm going to stop sharing. It's all you.
Thanks, Emma. Yeah, and feel free, as before I start, feel free to just throw things into the chat and talk amongst yourselves. I probably won't see the chat and engage with it so much. So if you do have a question that you do want me to answer directly, yeah, use the Q&A, and hopefully we'll have time at the end to talk about it. So. Thank you, Emma. Thank you, Ari, for everything you do, for having onX here. It's a privilege. Ari has been part of my life for a long time, since early education in my teens through today. And we're very thankful to have them and to be partnering up here for this little presentation. So I'm going to share my screen and get into it. Okay, I think I'm sharing. Emma, can I get a confirmation that I'm sharing my screen and it looks the way it should?
Yep, we can see your just the whole slideshow.
Perfect. This is the slideshow. Okay, so avalanche terrain exposure scale. Can you see the this whole thing here? Let me get this out of the way. Okay. Avalanche terrain exposure scale. This is something that I've been working with for the last 10 years, probably. The avalanche terrain exposure scale has a much longer history starting in Canada. And you can find a lot about that in the Avalanche Canada's website. And they've been working with this and rating avalanche terrain Canada for almost about 20 years now. And I've been working with it for just about 10 years. In this presentation, I'm going to talk about specifically how we use the avalanche terrain exposure scale for tour planning and tour execution. So not just about the geeky stuff about how we create it and what is behind it, but really how should we use it and how can it help us make better decisions. Okay, first a little bit about me, why I'm here. I dug up a picture from when I was 17 years old, skiing some of the mountains in Colorado. I've been passionate about the mountains from an early age, from a very, very young age, and got into backcountry skiing and really wanted to get into the big mountains. And as a young man often does, I had high ambitions. And the reason I put this picture in here with age a mentor for me as a youth. And it reminds me about why I'm here, the importance of mentorship, of sharing wisdom, enthusiasm, and just the pure stoke that we do with each other in the backcountry. There's nothing like it. There's nothing like camaraderie and friendship in the backcountry, especially when it comes with sharing wisdom and mentorship. So I really am here to help give back and hopefully share something that will help us all make better decisions in the backcountry. Um, why else am I here and what brings me here? Through my youth, I got into university and studied sociology and philosophy, which taught me how to think. Later, became a carpenter and a contractor, which taught me how to manage projects, and started a publishing company, as Emma mentioned, Beacon Guidebooks, making backcountry ski guidebooks and maps all over the country. Taught me the gravity and responsibility that comes with sharing and communicating information in this beautiful, but sometimes hostile environment. And I've been on X now for the last year and a half and managing, among other things, the ATES project, which is why I'm here. So here we are. What I'll be talking about is we'll do three things in this presentation. I'm going to make a case that a map is actually more important than a beacon, uh, and sometimes isn't seen that way. I'm going to talk about ATES, the autoATES layer, which is what we use at OnX, how it fits into the decision-making process. And then I'm going to put it together with a demo of how I use the ATES layer in my own decision-making as a backcountry skier. So the importance of a map. Now, I provocatively said that a map is more important than a beacon. By no means am I suggesting that you should leave your beacon at home because you have a map. Uh, I'm just trying to make the point that when we're at a trailhead and uh, we discover someone in our party doesn't have a beacon and we're going to avalanche terrain, we're probably not going to let that person ski with us. And hopefully that person has the wherewithal to say, I shouldn't ski today, I forgot my beacon. Or if somebody shows up to the trailhead with a beacon and says, I don't know how to use this thing, I've never used one before, that raises some red flags for you. And I do think a map and the knowledge of how to use it is as important and arguably more important because it's used to prevent the accident from happening in the first place. So yes, of course, bring all the other avalanche tools. This one can be overlooked. The point of a map in this case is to understand avalanche terrain, which in this slide is one of the three big pillars of what makes an avalanche. So there's these three main factors, the weather and the snowpack. These are things that are brought to us so much better than they were a couple decades ago. Weather technology, satellites, and forecasting has gotten extremely sophisticated, and it is really helping us make better decisions. Snowpack also is something that, of course, is integral to forming an avalanche. And we are very lucky, most of us, to have an avalanche center nearby that communicates the snowpack danger to us. However, terrain has been overlooked in many cases by not only us backcountry skiers, but by the industry in some ways. And we have some catch up to do. But it's a really important piece of the puzzle. That's why it gets a smiley face. We talk about margins a lot, margins of safety. So how maps relate to margins. Now, we're all familiar with margins of safety and creating margins of safety for ourselves as humans who make mistakes and sometimes go off course a little bit despite our best efforts. One common example is on the road, on the highway, you have a painted yellow line in the middle, you have a white line on the side, and then there's often a shoulder. And let's just consider that shoulder our margin of safety. It's a physical margin that we've given ourselves by driving on that road, and that the powers that be have given us a little margin, basically. So you stay in between the white line and the yellow line, you've increased your margin a lot. You go over that white line, you've decreased your margin of safety. It really is not that different from traveling and planning an avalanche terrain. Outside of that, we have abstract margins that maps can't do much for us. Um, abstract things like let's communicate more often than usual today. I'm feeling a little bit, I just really want to increase my margin of safety. Let's just be extra communicative and talk through the problems today and make sure that we're all feeling good about where we're going. I only want to travel with my most trusted partner today. That's an added margin that's more abstract. or I just want to stay well fed so I don't become hangry and a really poor decision maker. But physical margins are the things we're talking about here. How far away from the run out zone should we stay? That's a physical margin. How far away do we want to stay just to increase our margin of error, our margin of safety? How far away from the edge of the cornice? That feature up there rolls over steeper than we want. Let's start going back the other way so that we can stay as far away from that slope as we can. These are all ways to physically increase our margins. So when we look at a map, we can look for things that will help us increase or decrease our margins of safety. So it doesn't have to be interactive here, but I just want everybody to think about what it is you look for on a map instinctively that will inform you about things that can help increase your margins. Really popular one, slope shading. Most apps, most websites for navigation have it these days. It's getting more and more accurate. At onX, we have 1 meter LiDAR resolution in most of our ski terrain, and a lot of other apps have similar slope angle shading, anywhere between 10 meters and 1 meter accuracy. Hopefully someone thought ATES is something that you can see on a map that will help you increase a margin of safety. Aspect, of course, when you look at the avalanche forecast, it tells you things about slopes you should be avoiding or staying on, slope angles, what aspects have the avalanche problem of the day, what elevation the avalanche problem of the day is, and maybe some things about the characteristics of open terrain versus forested terrain. All of these things can be found on a map. These are the things that we should be studying when making decisions in the backcountry. So let's dig into that one that we pointed out, which is the avalanche terrain exposure scale. So I'm just going to go ahead and assume that everybody here in this room is being introduced to the avalanche terrain exposure scale, either at a very early stage or maybe for the first time. So I'll explain it to you. It is now, as of last year, a 5-point scale. It used to be 3. And it's a way of objectively defining the avalanche terrain as it relates to the avalanche. So it's not about difficulty. It's about exposure to avalanches, regardless of what the avalanche conditions are. So complex terrain, for example, ATES level 3 is complex terrain no matter how much snow is on it. It's just complex terrain. You put a dangerous snowpack on it, now you have a very dangerous slope. You take the snow away from it, it's still complex terrain. I hope that makes sense. Okay, let's start at the bottom. ATES 0, non-avalanche terrain. This is defined as no known exposure to avalanches. This is where we are putting a line in the sand and a stake and saying, you will not get in an avalanche terrain, in an avalanche, in non-avi terrain. It's sometimes very easy. Downtown, most cities, you are in non-avalanche terrain. It's tricky for those of us rating our terrain and measuring everything in the mountains when we get to this boundary right here between non-avalanche terrain and simple terrain. Simple terrain is avalanche terrain, and it's exposure to low angle or primarily forested terrain. And you can read on. Many options to reduce or eliminate exposure is kind of the key piece to know about in simple terrain. As we go up the scale, challenging, what a lot of us find ourselves skiing in. Despite the pretty blue color, it is dangerous avalanche terrain. It's exposure to well-defined avalanche paths and starting zones, terrain traps, overhead hazard. But with careful route finding, some options will exist to reduce or eliminate your exposure. So yes, it's more dangerous, but I also really like studying challenging terrain as a skier because of this key component. There's options to reduce or eliminate my exposure when I'm entering that terrain. So with good route finding and decision making, oftentimes something like there is a plan B, there's a B route, or I can turn around before I really commit to this line. That's challenging terrain. Complex, a little bit easier to understand. Think about looking at a mountain face and you've got multiple V's, V shapes converging into one spot. That's complex terrain. Big avalanche terrain. We see avalanches there regularly. As you're traveling through it, you have frequent exposure to overhead hazard, terrain traps, minimal options to reduce your exposure. Extreme terrain, level 4 is even easier to understand. It's big, it's nasty. There's no reducing your exposure. Um, yeah, pretty easy to figure out that one. This is a visual of the avalanche terrain exposure scale. This is in Utah. All five of those levels laid over the terrain. And I'll explain how this gets measured in a minute. I'm just giving the visual so we can see where we're going. But you can see we have non-avalanche terrain where it's not colored. We have simple terrain, that green stuff where you see some steepness, some rolling hills, some forested terrain, but no exposure to big overhead hazards, right? Challenging terrain, you do have some exposure to larger slopes, but you're still kind of maybe disconnected, smaller terrain features. Over here, we have some complex terrain, like I said, a little easier to understand. It's big, it's steep, it's sustained, and then extreme, you'll often find in this terrain, you'll see cliff bands, and of course, much bigger mountains. You'll see it beneath glaciated peaks and massive mountain faces. So that's that visual representation. How do we lay it over a actual mountain? We can objectively rate terrain, but geez, mountains are pretty dynamic. There's gullies. There's this is a slope called Snodgrass Mountain outside of Crested Butte where I live and ski. And it's complicated, right? We have little gullies. We have a bigger face up here. We have some dense forest. We have some open slopes below tree line. We have a sunnier side. We have shadier side. Some riverbed down here. So how do we go about rating something as dynamic and complicated as this we're trying to fit it into a box, right? And so how do we work out these details? This is the rubric that the folks in Canada invented. Grant Statham is one of the inventors and kind of the mastermind behind the avalanche terrain exposure scale. Sorry for the blurry graphic. I didn't realize I put a blurry one in here. But I won't get too deep into the details here. But we have 11 factors that we consider when we're looking at a slope like Snodgrass Mountain, and that is the exposure time someone's traveling through, the slope angle and forest density we talked about, the slope shape, meaning is it undulating, is it planar, is it big, is it convoluted? Terrain traps, are there terrain traps and what are they like? Frequency and magnitude, that's the history of the avalanches in the past. Do we see an avalanche every year? Do we see a big avalanche every year? Is it one every 100 years? And how far does it go? That's what this is all about. Starting zone size, run out zone characteristics, and then route options. So this is what the authors at Beacon Guidebooks and myself have used and we look at every single slope and every single run in those books. By the way, every zone and every run is in Onyx digitally as well. So we look at this rubric, and so looking at Snodgrass Mountain in the picture before, we see it's defined as intermittent exposure, managing a single path or paths with separation. That's a good way to describe Snodgrass. Moderate angle, less than 30-degree, open or graded terrain, with some open slopes greater than 35 degrees. That's a very accurate description of Snodgrass. It has convoluted open slopes with intricate and varied terrain, so complex is the best way to define slope shape. Terrain traps we defined as complex. Frequency and magnitude fit more of the challenging. I don't actually use lightning bolts when normally rating the terrain. This was for this slideshow. But we do use this process of selecting each cell that best defines the terrain that we're looking at and studying. So starting zone size and density, the runout zone characteristics, and the route options. So at the end of studying a piece of terrain and selecting each cell that matched the best definition, we come out with an answer. So you see that challenging terrain got the majority of the votes, and therefore our decision is that this is challenging terrain. Now, usually when we're working with mountain guides, forecasters, and authors, there's some discussion here. Each one of us will go through this rubric ourselves, and then we'll discuss. So while it is objective, there is sometimes room for conversation, and some of us will realize maybe we selected one cell because we weren't thinking about it holistically or something. So After all of that decision making is done, we decide, yes, it is challenging. And next slide. There it is. And in this case, Snodgrass Mountain got rated as a challenging slope, the north face of Snodgrass. Now, the autoATES layer at OnX, we're not able to, with satellites and with algorithms and mathematic technology, we're not able to do things like route options because that's really a person's scale. And autoATES really just taking what we can measure with LiDAR data, with satellite data, and imagery. So slope angle and forest density is a very big, these are two very big important factors. We use our LiDAR data for slope angle, and we use Sentinel imagery for forest density. We measure starting zone size and density by measuring slope angle again, and then the size of slope. We actually will measure the size of an uninterrupted given piece of slope, and then runout zone characteristics. We use a model called FlowPy, which takes the alpha angle of an avalanche and uses physics basically to predict how far an avalanche will run. And I'll show the visual representation of that in just a minute here. And so this is what autoATES spits out for the same exact mountain, same slope. It says, okay, oops. It says this is mostly challenging terrain on this slope, but it's a little bit more nuanced because we're, on a much more higher resolution ability to paint over the mountains, which is something I always dreamed of doing at Beacon Guidebooks, but it's harder to do on paper than it is digitally with a layer. So it's been a real pleasure to work with this layer. But you can see that we came out with a very similar conclusion. Much of the terrain on Snodgrass Mountain is blue ATES to challenging terrain. And we get to see some cool nuances, once again, helping us increase our margins of safety. We see these little black challenging patches. These are very accurate, I would say, just as someone very familiar with that mountain. This is a steeper open slope with some cliffs and a place that I'd like to avoid if I'm really trying to increase my margin of safety. So that's what that looks like just in a basic screenshot. So going back to how we use this, so that's great. We rated the terrain. We've got blue over here. We've got black over there. But how does this help me make a decision as a backcountry skier? Am I just always going to find myself in challenging terrain because that's where the best skiing is? And therefore, is this tool helping me at all? I would argue that, first of all, we shouldn't just assume that we're always going into challenging terrain because that's where the fun skiing is. Challenging terrain is where most avalanche deaths and accidents happen. And it's often because it looks like something we can manage and something that we're familiar with, or whatever the reason is, we think that it's a good idea at the time. And we have to remember what is in our control. And terrain choice is, for me, a big answer all the time. What kind of terrain should we be going into? So this is the mental model that I have always had, thanks to our Silverton guidebook author, Josh Kling, who brought up this concept for me. Think about all of these factors as dials that you can adjust or that are adjusted for you, and you have to adapt to with other dials. So these dials don't represent ATES. Obviously, you can see it's green, yellow, and red, just a dial image, but it's a mental model. So take weather and snowpack. That's completely out of our control. That dial is set, and we have to respond to it. So what is the weather today? What is the snowpack? If it is a dangerous snowpack today and the weather is a little bit iffy, well, that means that I should probably, adjust my terrain accordingly and probably adjust these other things that are in my control: group, time, fitness, other variables like that. If I'm going to go out in the backcountry today with the elevated avalanche danger, I'm really going to be turning these dials down, essentially. Make it so that I can be in a little bit more control of the plan. Let's say that I'm on a hut trip. This is a very common scenario for me, and I think a lot of us, we find ourselves in a place where we are not as in control as we sometimes are. We suddenly have a larger group, and we're in unfamiliar terrain, and we have all day, so maybe we can't predict the conditions as well, and maybe somebody isn't as fit, maybe that person is me. These are things that we have to adapt to. And so I find myself often adjusting this dial the most, the terrain dial. So if any of these things are leaving that low side, that green side, I should be adjusting my terrain down. And that's the model that I use often. Now, I do switch my method of thinking sometimes when I say, like, there's a mountain face that is a piece of complex terrain, and I really want to ski that. It doesn't have to be today. I just want to ski it someday. And so that's when I'm looking for that dial in the weather and snowpack side to become what I want. In the case of a big um, complex face, I want that dial to be down to a very, very low degree. Um, but it's not that I can adjust it, but I can wait. And patience can really pay off when it comes to staying alive in avalanche terrain. So if there's anything that you take away from this and from that dial concept, it's my eat your greens concept. So no matter when I was a kid growing up, no matter what the problem was, my mom's solution was always to eat more greens, add more greens to my day. I got a headache, eat more greens. I'm tired, eat more greens. I want to get stronger, eat more greens. Whatever the problem was, add more greens to your day. And I'm going to recommend we do the same thing for backcountry skiing. Yes, we should eat our greens. But taking the analogy over to the avalanche layers, let's add more green to our day, depending on what the problem is. No matter what the problem, we can probably find some green to put in there. So slope angle shading, we talked about earlier. Um, Something cool that we did on X this year is we added this 12 to 25 degree slope, whereas in the past, there was no color for that slope angle. We made it so that we colored that green so that we could talk about a place where you could get some fun turns outside of steep terrain. So a little bit more of pointing you where you can go rather than just pointing out this dangerous stuff at 35 degrees or 25 degrees and above. Let's talk a little bit about where we can go. So that's that green stuff. Low avalanche danger. If it's green, you've added a big piece of green to your day. So yeah, maybe you can eat some bacon today. Maybe you can get into some more avalanche terrain if you've got low danger. As we all know, just like with simple terrain still being avalanche terrain, low danger does not mean no danger, but it's a heck of a dial that we can respond to. And then ATES also colors simple terrain green. So 3 ways to add greens to your day. One is out of your control. The other two are in your control. And these are ones that I lean on a lot because they are things that I can control. I'll say it over and over again. So let's bring that into a demo. When I was giving a presentation earlier this winter, I was basically talking about all this stuff theoretically. And somebody he was a very experienced skier in the room, he just raised his hand and said, Andy, like, when you already have the mindset of adapting to the terrain, adapting, your terrain decisions to these fixed elements like weather and snowpack. Um, when do you use it? And I've thought a little bit about it since then. My answer then was the same as it is now. It's when I'm in an unfamiliar situation. And this is very true. I do use this layer quite a bit as a backcountry skier. And when unfamiliarity is introduced, I will lean more on these terrain tools. So unfamiliarity can look like that hut situation I was talking about. I think unfamiliar hut trips are one of the more they bring more stress to me than lots of other situations out there. Uh, we are with a bigger group than I usually am comfortable with. We're in unfamiliar terrain, and oftentimes there's social dynamics that are moving and difficult to navigate and can bring a lot of stress on people. There's stress. There's bigger, longer days, and just more dynamics. So that's when I like really want to rely more on these tools that will help increase my margin of safety. So unfamiliar partners, if there's a new partner and I don't know their skill set, their ability to make decisions, to communicate, to rescue, that's when I'll be using layers like this. New zone, just like on a hut trip. But if I'm in a new area, I really want to be spending more time studying the terrain, and ATES is a great way to do that. Unfamiliar snowpack. So sometimes that means, yeah, you're in a hut and you don't have access to the avalanche forecast, so you don't know what they know. You have to dig more yourself and dig in. Or it's the type of unfamiliar snowpack that we get in Colorado. Sometimes well, we get it everywhere. It shouldn't just be Colorado. These mistakes happen everywhere. And sometimes we'll see a persistent slab, a persistent weak layer problem that is just defying all odds. It's been a long time since the last loading event. It's been days since the last avalanche was triggered, and then somebody will trigger the avalanche. And it's unpredictable and spooky. And that's the kind of snowpack that makes me say, I'm going to increase my margin of speed today and really stay away from things because it's surprising people. And if it's surprising professionals and my friends, that means that I could be caught unaware as well. So that's when I'll be using ATES. Now, I'm going to switch screens. So I talked about hut trip. This is an example of a situation where I would probably lean on ATES more than I maybe do in my go-to spot where I go for dawn patrols and could navigate with my eyes closed. Let's say I get invited to a hut trip. This is near Vale Pass. This is Janet's cabin. I haven't been to it. I'm somewhat familiar with Vale Pass. I've skied there a little bit, snowmobiled there a little bit, and but I'm not really familiar with the nuances of it. And let's say I'm going on a hut trip. I was invited by people that I don't really know very well. We're going to be in avalanche terrain, and I'm going to use all the tools I can at my disposal. So planning my trip and just starting to navigate the terrain, looking around, this is what I'll do. And I will zoom in on the spot. I've got Janet's cabin marked here. Now, some people ask me, doesn't the slope angle layer tell us everything we need? If it's a steep slope, it's more of an avalanche slope. If it's less steep, it's less of an avalanche slope. It does tell a big part of the picture, but it doesn't tell the whole picture. That's really the point of the ATES scale, is it takes into account slope angle, but also forest density, runout characteristics, terrain traps, and then how we can move through it. So for example, we can see, I turn on the slope angle here. This is great. I got a lot of green. I'm really happy with this. I have green and I have stuff that's so flat that I can even use it to manage the routes that I want to travel through. I'm going to go into 3D mode here and look at the face and the ski terrain right around Janet's cabin. And I see plenty of green, low angle slopes. This is the 12 to 25 degree slopes. I see that maybe I could be getting up onto this bench. I see it gets from flat to steep fairly quickly. I see maybe I could even go up and over this pass and explore in this terrain a little bit, all while staying out of avalanche terrain. But I do see some questions here. I see a steep slope over here on the left side of the screen. And I see some flat and green terrain right below it. And knowing some things about runout zones, I've got some concerns there, but I don't have anything to illustrate my concerns if, say, someone else in the group isn't concerned. So that's where we'll turn on these other layers. One of the big variables that goes into the ATES scale is runout characteristics. I talked about that flow pi model and predicting how far an avalanche could travel hypothetically, just given the size of the slope and the steepness of it over time. And that's what this is. This is literally an avalanche simulator. And I'll turn it off and turn it back on again. Here, I'll use this potential release area starting zone layer as well. Oh, we're gonna go with slope angle. Slope angles is often where the avalanches start, and we see the avalanche run out layer, what I like to call the simulator, shows us where the avalanche could actually run to. So looking at that, we see the purple in layer details displays a lower probability. We're talking about, it has to be one of those really spooky conditions I talked about, a persistent weak layer, a huge slab, unpredictable, on a very weak layer that is stubborn and hard to trigger. That's when we get these larger events that could maximize those very unlikely and very low frequency, but possible avalanches. That's what this purple color is. And going up the slope, we get to the warmer colors that say like, this is a steep slope and it will see avalanches here regularly. In this case, pretty small. But this is a much different picture than we saw earlier with just the slope angle. The slope angle made me feel like maybe I could be comfortable traveling here. But if it's, here, I'll share this. This is the forecast for today on the CAIC website. We've got moderate near and above tree line, so that zone we're looking at. We've got moderate conditions, and this is the thing that I'm looking for. The problem is a persistent slab problem. This is a problem where I like to, once again, I was out of control. This is out of my control. It just is what it is today, and this is my hut trip. So the dial that I'm going to adjust, I'm going to stay out of these run out paths. I just don't want to deal with them. And that's what this layer is here for, is showing us that, a physical margin of safety that we can navigate around. I still see this bench as a great place to go travel. And I even see some, we saw with that slope angle, we saw some green in there. And we might be able to get some hippie pow turns in there. To tell the whole picture, we see the avalanche terrain exposure scale. Once again, we see that it has painted a lot of this as challenging. Some of it is complex. And then up in here, I talked about being able to walk around on this bench. Yeah, but I do want to make sure I'm staying clear of this challenging terrain if that's the risk tolerance that I've set for myself for the day. I do see some cool options still to maybe go up and over this pass. So once again, this is just a good scenario, or a scenario where I can explain how I use these tools to my benefit in unfamiliar situations. So once again, we're dealing, that was a nice example to use because in the avalanche forecast for the day we saw it's spooky. A persistent weak layer to me is a spooky problem, and I like to wait. Once again, patience is in my control, and I can wait until the danger runs down to low, or at least that persistent weak layer goes away. If you do practice these things, some days, what I've decided is really today, my goal was just to get outside and ski. My goal was not to thread the needle, not to prove to anybody that I really am the best decision maker in the backcountry and I can do this steeper slope because I know something you don't know. Usually my goal is to go enjoy the sunshine or the snow and get home alive and go do it again tomorrow. And sometimes that means skiing. This literally is a video of me having decided to take the more simple terrain day, even though my original plan had been a bigger objective. This is a slope that's about 12 degrees that I like to go walk up in the woods and ski down. That day was actually pretty good because it was like 3 inches of soft ski penetration, and even got some good turns. But if you don't have to watch it again, I promise. If you play your cards right and you wait until that avalanche danger goes down to low and you wait for the video to load, you can get into terrain like this. The variables need to be right, and patience needs to pay off, and it can happen. This is a day in May, and it was already a very isothermal spring snowpack, and we had about 6 inches of new snow on it, and the danger was low with no persistent weak layer problem, and it can happen. So these are all methods we use to go ski the terrain that we want and come home tomorrow and enjoy another day out in the backcountry. That is it. We can go to Q&A. We can get into the chat once I exit full screen. and Emma can come back on and we can field some questions. Or do you have any questions, Emma?
Awesome. Thanks, Andy. No, that was great. I really appreciate your perspective. I think that's something that a lot of our instructors do a really good job of reminding students is this, what can you control? And really that our goal is to be able to do this a bunch more times, right? And that means dialing back and that sometimes Hippie Pow can be really fun and awesome. Um, and in combination with other objectives, right? So good to have a terrain catalog so that you can choose what is the most appropriate for the day's conditions. But no, that was a really great demonstration and really appreciate your thinking on how you use this. Kind of having a real world demo is great. Um, let's see. So we've got a question in the chat, and folks, feel free to keep dropping these into the chat or into the Q&A. This person is wondering, do you use GPS to ensure you're where you think you are based on your map? And I think I just want to make sure I understand the question. Are you wondering if Andy uses a GPS device in addition to the map that he's using in the Onyx app? Um, that's how I'm reading the question. Yep. Okay. Yeah. Andy, do you use a GPS device in addition to using the app?
Um, the only GPS device I use for in while backcountry skiing, well, I guess I use two. One is my phone. I download offline maps in OnX and will use that GPS device to navigate in the backcountry. And I do it pretty religiously now. Um, Many years ago, when I was more of a analog paper person, I was quite slow to adopt the app train. I was skiing in a slope in Argentina, and clouds came in so thick and so hard that I couldn't see down from up, left from right, complete vertigo, complete ping pong ball. And luckily, I had been tracking myself on my GPS device that day and literally got out my phone and the flashy blue dot and did what we say you should never do, which is I watched my phone and followed my track back down because I knew there were cliffs below me, and if I navigated the wrong way, I could go over those cliffs. It's not that it saved my life, but it sure saved me a lot of time of like tiptoeing down the slope. Um, and that's when I started using the GPS device and making sure I always download my maps and bring it out there. I don't use a wearable watch, kind of on my list of things to do, but for now, the flashy blue dot, we do overlook it. It's a safety device, that flashy blue dot. I said I use two GPS devices. The other one is a InReach. I use I don't actually use it actively, but I almost always have one on me now. The other question here is, do the ATES and Avalanche runout layers only exist in the Onyx app? Yes, we're the only ones that have done it. We're the only app that has done it. In Canada, you can find it on the Avalanche Canada website, I believe, in their trip planning tool. They have been mapping, doing the same thing, using autoATES, invented by and worked on by John Sykes at Simon Fraser University. He's helping them develop that layer for a whole bunch of terrain in Canada as well. So I encourage you to go check that out. But no, the only other places I've seen ATES besides Beacon guidebooks is some other guidebooks I've seen will try to apply the scale, just a little bit more kind of like putting the thumb up and saying like, that's definitely complex terrain. Sometimes you can do that. But I don't know, have you ever seen it anywhere else, Emma, as far as?
No, really just in occasional guidebooks and sometimes like in academic papers, you'll see it applied to a certain like a popular destination or pass or area. But Onyx is the only one that's doing this like consistently in a way that you can look at and ground truth, once you're standing there looking at the feature. So, yep, no other GPS apps that have that capability at this time.
And I'll add one thing, Andy, to what you said, which is that Onyx is actually validating these layers with local experts, with Avalanche Center employees and forecasters who are very familiar with these areas, and they're helping us iterate on the ways in which we publish this information. So even if I think another organization were to come in and produce these layers, that validation is a really key piece of ensuring their trustworthiness.
Thanks for bringing that up, Tony. I should have brought that up myself. Yeah, it's been a big piece of the work. We do have amazing cartographers at Onyx developing the layer, and it's getting more and more accurate. However, it's still invented by humans, and we can't completely trust the machines. So we have a process after we develop that layer. We have it basically in our backend where we can see it. We work with Avalanche forecasters, with mountain guides, and anybody else who will look at it with us. And we basically just say, like, is this doing what we expected to do? First of all, we have a quality just assurance process. Did we screw something up? Does it look, are there like weird lines going through it? And then once we say it looks as it should, now we say, is it doing its job? And I usually ask local forecasters to say, everyone has the slope in their neighborhood. Everyone has one of those slopes where as soon as the storm clears and the sky becomes blue and the danger reduces from high to considerable, you start to see people like start to edge out into the backcountry. And there's that one slope where you start seeing people skiing it, and you're like, this is too soon. And that slope goes every year, and wow, it's now it's just getting tracked up, and it's still like it is a piece of aggressive terrain, and people are skiing it, and someone's going to lose the lottery here. We all have that slope in our backyard somewhere. Every forecaster know, like, could, like, when I say that prompt, every forecaster is like, oh yeah, I know that slope. It's called Andy's Bowl, or whatever it is. It's everyone has one, because we all look up at that slope and say, like, oh, everyone skis that all the time, and like, oh man, that track looks so good. And so when we're looking at these layers and validating them, we say, does ATES do the job of telling people what that slope really is? Not what we don't want to just say, hey, it's all dangerous, don't go. We want to say, like, that slope is complex. So just understand that as you're adjusting your risk tolerance to the day. And so we go through that kind of process, and we get a lot of really good feedback from forecasters. And in many cases, we go back and we adjust some of those algorithms to adapt to that. For example, in Utah, we were using our Intermountain snowpack model, because most of the Wasatch is intermountain. But for the Uinta Mountains, the forecasters told us this is more of a continental snowpack like you see in Colorado. We need to use the continental snowpack model to measure that terrain. So forecasters really help us in all sorts of cases like that.
Yeah.
Another question
And
here. Oh, go ahead.
oh, no, I was just going to say, and also just, we've alluded to this in a couple different ways, but of course, we have to ground truth everything that we see once we're actually there looking at it, right? So that, of course, applies to ATES ratings and to slope angle shading and to, the seeing where the run out could go, right? Like, we can't rely completely on any one piece of information. We also have to ground truth everything, and it's all pieces of the puzzle that fit together in that way. So it's but a really cool thing that Onyx is collaborating with local forecast centers. That's one of the best ways to help ground truth this information. So
Yeah.
yeah, and then we do have another question. Somebody's wondering how many areas the layer is on, how many areas you can use that in Onyx right now. This person is wondering about the presidentials in New Hampshire. So can you give us a little bit of a where it is and where we can expect to see it, Andy?
Yeah, that's another thing I meant to say and didn't. So thanks for the question. We are tackling forecast areas, one forecast area at a time. Well, a couple at a time, but we're doing them, in the method that we just talked about. So we're doing it carefully, albeit maybe slowly. But for me, having done it for 9 years at Beacon Guidebooks, we're going at a rapid pace here. But I think we're at 38 regions as of today that are done. These are so forecast area regions, and we have almost that same amount to do still. And yes, the presidentials in New Hampshire is one of those. And I'm optimistic that within the next 18 months, that and just about everything else will be done as well. So don't hold me to it, but we have a lot of Colorado, a lot of Utah, a lot of Washington covered. We released Tahoe area recently this winter, and we're about to release the Eastern Sierra Nevada of California as well, which is a huge area. Today we turned on Mount Hood, so you can see the Mount Hood region, which is super cool to look at. If you're a map geek like me, looking at that terrain and the ATES layer there is really neat just on that volcano. And the Olympic Mountain Range on the Olympic Peninsula of Washington was released recently too. So, yep, I'm actually really excited to do the presidentials, Anton. I hope we do it soon.
Awesome. Any other questions, folks? Feel free to drop those in the chat or in the Q&A.
Any future questions to Onyx, you're always welcome to reach out to help at Onyx. The folks at our customer service team, if it's ATES related or Avalanche terrain related, it'll usually get passed on to me. And as you can see, I love talking about this stuff. So I'll always enthusiastically answer your questions. So thanks, Emma.
I'm also going to just do a shameless plug for Beacon Guidebooks. I just dropped a link into the chat as well. If you live in one of those areas that Andy just mentioned, there is likely a Beacon guidebook that applies to the area where you might want to tour. So a lot of really good information. And also those are done by folks who have spent many years and in some cases many decades touring in those areas and guiding in those areas. So there's a lot of really good information and a lot just sort of generally applicable to tour planning as well. So really good information in those Beacon guidebooks. So check those out.
Thanks, Emma.
Great. Well, folks, yeah, anytime. I'm happy to plug the product. I really believe in it. So, yeah, folks, thank you so much for attending our last ARI Tuesday night webinar of the season. Really excited to have Andy here, and it's just really fun to geek out about this stuff with you, Andy. So appreciate all the great information. And folks, I'll send out the recording to this webinar to everybody who is registered. That'll go out by the end of this week. And I've got a small person that I've got to get ready for bed here in a few minutes. So if you're hearing squeaky noises, that's what that is. But folks, really appreciate you being excited to further your Avalanche education. So thanks, Andy and Tony, for joining us. And thanks to everybody for taking an hour out of your Tuesday night to learn a little bit more about how to safely recreate in avalanche terrain. Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.